Has anyone ever asked you how you're doing? It doesn't stop there. Asked you how you're doing. And even though your life was a bit of a mess, you said, "Oh, I'm great." Raise your hand if you have been there. Okay. I am a psychologist and I study what happens when we hide our struggles from other people. Not just occasionally, but all the time. When we have something specific that is tormenting us, that we want to get off our chest. But then someone sincerely checks in on us and asks, "How are things going?" And we say nothing. Let's say you get laid off from work, or your partner leaves you, or your dog passes away, whatever it is. And then someone asks how you're doing, and you pretend that all is fine. Don't worry, if you are such an under-sharer, you're not alone. Many of us pretend to be okay when we are not. Why do we do this? Well, it turns out many of us are afraid that our problems are a burden to someone else. And we don't want to bother them. We worry that other people won't relate. Some of us might worry that other people will judge us for being such a mess. Perhaps worse, some of us might worry that other people don't even care about us enough to judge us in the first place. But are these fears about opening up warranted? Now here's the good news. I have learned from my research over the last few years that most of the time these fears go too far and that we are too cynical about other people. But that this cynicism can trap us in a loneliness that becomes self-fulfilling. Here's the irony. When I started researching this topic, I was deeply cynical myself. My trust issues started, guess what, in middle school, where I had good reason to hide my struggles from my classmates. They were the ones making me struggle. I remember one time I was telling someone in my class that I'm feeling pretty lonely. And he said, "Hey, we can hang out sometime and play some video games together." I remember being so excited, and I showed up way ahead of time and waited for him. And waited. And waited. He never showed up. Except the next day in class, he was telling some of my classmates that he actually did show up, hiding in the bushes to watch me wait. Teaching me the generous lesson that I was a naive fool for thinking that a nerd like me could ever have a friend. It didn't take a lot of moments like this for me to learn that maybe I should be hiding who I really am. Whenever people asked how I'm doing, I would just say, "Oh, I'm fine, thanks." Anything to fit in, right? And I really wasn't sure whether to include that in the talk. I even got the Justin Bieber haircut. Cool, okay. I think that's long enough. Okay, you can tell I wasn't really a fan of it, but again, anything to fit in. My classmates were figuring out relationships. Meanwhile, I was getting more and more married to my work. I was pursuing that strategy where if you just don't think about your loneliness and distract yourself with work, your loneliness just goes away. And it worked. People started praising me for my self-reliance and work ethic, which got me into a good college in Berlin, and then later into my PhD at Stanford. Except here, of course, I had to hide how I'm really doing even more than before. I was constantly overwhelmed with work, but everyone else seems to be changing the world all the time. Whenever people asked how I'm doing, I would just say, "I'm so busy." Not as a confession, but as a brag. And then guess what? People would say, "Oh, I'm so busy too." Oh, God, I couldn't open up to these people about how I'm really doing. So I had to confess my struggles to the one thing in the world that I did trust: academic research. I mean it. I started talking to research papers in the field, looking for scientific, honest, objective answers to my problems. After all, I was studying exactly what I was struggling with, being afraid to open up to others, to trust. Believe it or not, it seemed like a full coincidence to me at the time. Not anymore. But one evening that both the researcher and I weren't too busy, we sat down for the conversation that was going to resolve why other people weren't connecting with me. Here's how I remember this conversation. Me. Hey, research. I am so tired of pretending this much. But I don't know if anyone cares to see the real me. Everyone I talk to seems a little bit superficial. Any ideas why I struggle with this no matter where I go? Research. Oh, fascinating research question, Eric. Have you considered you are the problem? What? No. Sorry, that came out wrong. I mean, I'm sure you have good reason to be so guarded, Eric. Many people say their optimism about people is shattered after some people let them down. And as you know from the data, it's a really painful state to be in, to be so cynical, so guarded, even if you appear fine on the outside. But if you put your guard up around everyone because some people in the past let you down, it might explain why other people aren't connecting with you now. Eric, remember the study about how people can be scared to open up to someone who seems guarded. If you pretend that everything is fine, then other people don't want to tell you how much of a mess their life is. And then you both keep pretending to each other. Turns out everyone is a mess. We're just all so good at pretending otherwise to each other that we keep forgetting about this. Here on Stanford's own campus, we have the term Stanford duck syndrome, where we're all pretending to each other to be this calm duck gliding across the water. But under the surface, we're all like pedaling hectically to move forward. Remember the beginning when I asked who can relate to this feeling of pretending to be okay when you're not? And as far as I can see, everyone raised their hand. Now, people might not relate to the specifics of your problems, of your struggles. But chances are they will appreciate the mere fact that you trusted them. I find this again and again in my research. People love to be trusted. People like to be asked for advice, to show up for someone who needs help. It can make someone's day to show empathy for someone who is struggling. And that's why most people don't see it as a burden to hear about your problems. Research finds again and again that we tend to underestimate how much other people like us, but that we overestimate how awkward these deep conversations are going to be. Except if we never take that first step and open up to other people, we may never find out. Let me tell you about a study I ran recently to understand these dynamics better. Are people truly afraid to open up, to make that first step and open up to someone? Imagine you're a participant in my study. You sign up and now you get paired to chat with a complete stranger for 12 minutes. You can talk about whatever you want. Your task is to get to know each other. You can go as deep and vulnerable as you want. But first, I ask you, if you want to go deep, do you want to start? Or do you want the other person to start? If you were a participant in my study, what do you think you would say? 1 in 6 of my participants said they wanted to be the ones starting the conversation. The other ones were hesitant, and then oftentimes they got matched with someone who was hesitant too. And they spent 12 minutes talking about the weather. Don't get me wrong, talking about the weather is great, small talk is great, and science shows that even fleeting interactions like this boost our happiness more than we think. But the participants in my study who enjoyed the conversations the most, who enjoyed their partners the most, were the ones who went personal, who used this as a chance to get something off their chest and be vulnerable. One participant, she talked about how she was dating someone, and just as she was falling out of love with him, he was more and more falling in love with her. And she was not feeling great about it. She was like, I'm going to break his heart. I'm going to destroy him. This is so bad. What am I going to do? Maybe I should fake the feelings or force the relationship to be something it's not and neither of us wants. But ultimately, she decided to be honest and break up. Now imagine you're the chat partner, complete stranger, and someone just tells you this. How do you react? If you confess this, you might worry that the other person says something like, I'm just here to make money. Why are you telling me this? I don't care. But of course, that's not what happens. When someone opens up like this to you, we tend to be supportive. The first person said, I feel like I ruined him. How did the other person respond? I think you did the right thing. You were honest. You didn't give your ex false hopes. I think you're a good and kind person. What a sweet and memorable exchange. But here's the irony. Yes, most of my participants did not want to start these deep conversations. But almost all of them were happy to have them if the other person started them. But if the other person stuck to small talk, then people matched that as well. Now, recognizing the value of opening up is one thing, actually doing it another. When I started opening up to people, I had to give up the idea that my struggles were special, unique, unrelatable. And I had to allow for the possibility that maybe other people cared more for me than I thought. And then I just had to do it. Just had to go out there and look for opportunities to open up. Which is how I ended up on this flight recently to a conference sitting next to Julie. Two things you need to know about Julie. One, she is one of the highest achieving PhD students in my program. Someone who truly does seem to have it all figured out. Two, Julie is not the kind of person to lose time on small talk. Which is why she barely sat down next to me on the plane for 5 seconds, cornering me in my window seat, before she turned to me, smiled, and said, So Eric, tell me, what problems are at the bottom of your soul? At that very moment, the cabin crew was announcing that, whoops, our flight will be delayed, so please don't move, prepare for a long flight. Thank you. I was ready for a very long flight. But of course, it turned into the most liberating conversation. I was a little bit scared at first and just opened up a little bit, saying that I'm worried about this upcoming conference and my research. Are people going to like it? And she was able to relate. And then I opened up more and say, I'm worried about my professional future in general. And no matter what I said, she was able to relate, sharing her own stories of loneliness and confusion and anxiety. This is what I learned there. There's no such thing as a person who has it all figured out. And the other thing I learned is that somehow the more specific I went in my stories, the more she was able to relate. Before I knew it, I was talking about my childhood trauma. Going back all the way to middle school, where I was bullied. And we talked about this. But then I also said that recently, I have realized that actually most people in my class were nice, were decent people. Almost no one laughed at the story of me being stood up. But that I was so cynical already back then that I was just blind to recognizing all this kindness around me. Now, I think we can all learn from these insights that I have shared. What are some specific, actionable principles to remember if you want to open up more? Here are 3 principles that I have found helpful and that might be helpful for you too. 1, don't dwell on your fears. The more time you take to think about the many, many things that can go wrong when you open up to someone, the more your brain might distort how little it takes to connect with people. People like Julie, it's not that they're not afraid. They just don't let their fears stop them. One practice here is perspective switching. Afraid to tell your friend that you got laid off? Imagine your friend came to you with these news. How would you react? Would you judge them and say, well, get your life together? Or would you want to be supportive? Of course you would want to be supportive. Why would it be any other way when you flip the tables? And then imagine how it would feel to find out that your friend got laid off, but to find out not from your friend, but from someone else. And to find out that your friend didn't trust you with this information. Principle 2, test your fears against reality. At some point you have to go out there and do it. I trust that you know what context might be good in your life. You know that better than I would. Find some context where it might be safe enough to open up a little bit, testing the waters one step at a time, and see how they react. If they're not supportive, well, take note and remember they're just scared of your vulnerability. If they are supportive, consider opening up more and see what happens. Let's say your friendly elderly neighbor checks in on you, asking how life is going. And well, your partner left you, so you decide to be honest and say, it's awful. Chances are they will appreciate the trust and they have been through the same and might have some guidance to offer. It's probably not a burden for them. The bigger burden might be that no one takes them seriously. Last principle, reflect if your fears were warranted. After the fact, was it as bad as you thought? Or was it actually fine? Let's say your dog passes away and now you're at this dinner party and this stranger who's friendly is talking to you and says, how's your day going? And you decide to be honest. I'm sad my dog passed away. What did you think would happen and what actually happened? You might worry, oh God, they're going to run away and say, I'm going to talk to someone more cheerful, thank you, bye. Chances are that doesn't actually happen. They're probably supportive. Maybe they have a dog too. Maybe they're relieved that you decided to have an actual human-to-human conversation. Then if you benefited from their attention, tell them, because they are probably worried themselves that they didn't have the right words to say, when actually all you needed from them is that they listen deeply. And then finally, watch out for signs where maybe they are starting to open up to you, and then encourage them by actively listening yourself. I'm sure you all have many stories to tell about the people who let you down in the past and made you act this way, who made you act this guarded, this cynical. But what happens if you let those people ruin your trust in everyone? What happens is that you might be adding loneliness to betrayal. And you start treating people based not on who they actually are, but based on your most cynical fears of who they could be. Don't always hide that your life can be a mess. Because let's all be honest here for just one moment. Stop pretending and acknowledge we're all a mess sometimes. We're all deeply, deeply, deeply confused. And that's why most of us prefer to hang out with someone who doesn't pretend otherwise. This is not part of the script, but for the purpose of being honest. While I'm giving this presentation, there's a lot of thoughts at the back of my head about who the hell do I think I am to be giving a TED Talk? No one cares about my ideas, no one cares about me. What am I doing here? Trying to give me a panic attack right now. but I'm trying to share that because you all might not see that. You just see this curated presentation. But that's the best part here. We can all start having these conversations any time. We don't have to wait for someone else to do it. We can be the ones starting these conversations and stop pretending. Don't let your anxieties tell you otherwise. Thank you.